Imagine boarding a flight, stepping into the quiet luxury of first class, ready for a peaceful journey. Now imagine being told you don't belong there, not because of your ticket, but because of how you look. This is the moment Isaiah Cole, a calm and composed airline executive, faced one of the most painful forms of invisible injustice being judged before being known. On a flight from New York to Lisbon, Isaiah's quiet dignity was met with a cold suspicion by a lead flight attendant. Without warning, he was forced from his seat, his presence questioned by people who didn't know his story, his rank, or his worth. But Isaiah didn't shout. He didn't retaliate. Instead, he stood with strength that demanded the truth be seen and heard. What happens when power, privilege, and prejudice collide miles above the earth? How far will one man's silent resistance shake an entire airline? And what does it take to turn humiliation into a call for justice that can't be ignored? Join us as we uncover the deeply personal and painfully relevant story of Isaiah Cole, a story about dignity, respect, and the fight to belong. If stories about justice and standing your ground matter to you, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's make sure these voices are never silenced. The boarding gate at JFK buzzed with the usual chaos: families juggling carry-ons, suited executives checking emails, and a group of students nervously comparing passports. Near Gate 43, the final boarding call echoed for Luma Air Flight 411 nonstop service to Lisbon. Isaiah Cole stood to the side, calm amid the noise. He was tall, dressed in a dark charcoal suit that fit too well to be off the rack. His shoes were polished, but not flashy. His coat bore a slight travel wrinkle at the shoulder, the only hint he had flown more miles than anyone else waiting in line. In his right hand, he held a worn leather briefcase with initials barely visible along the seams. He didn't check his phone. He didn't rush the gate. He just waited. A gate agent scanned his boarding pass. First class, seat 2O. Welcome aboard, Mr. Cole. He gave her a polite nod, his expression unreadable. A few other passengers glanced at him. One woman's eyes narrowed, flicking from his face to his briefcase to his boarding group tag. He was used to that look. It came without words, but it said everything. Isaiah stepped into the plane and entered the quiet hush of first class. It was one of Luma Air's new wide-body aircrafts, sleek and minimal, with champagne-toned lighting and soft piano music playing overhead. The other first-class passengers were still settling in. A businessman arranged his Bluetooth keyboard on the tray table. A couple clinked glasses of sparkling wine. A flight attendant passed through with folded blankets and hot towels. Isaiah moved to seat 2A, near the window. He placed his briefcase gently beneath a seat in front of him, sat down, and exhaled slowly. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded printout. It wasn't a book or a newspaper. It was a report pages of operational audit notes. He was reviewing them when he noticed a shadow. "Excuse me, sir?" He looked up. The voice belonged to a woman in her late 30s with a sleek blonde bun and sharp blue eyes. Her uniform was flawless. Her name tag read Brittany Lang, lead purser. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass," she said, clipboard in hand. Isaiah didn't hesitate. He handed it over. She took it and looked at it for a beat too long. She murmured. "That's odd. This seat was reassigned this morning." Isaiah's voice was calm. "I double-checked at the gate. Everything scanned correctly." Brittany blinked once. She was still holding the pass. "Well, there might have been a last-minute change," she said, "until we sort this out. I'm going to ask you to wait in economy." There was no apology, no concern, just a firm smile that wasn't really a smile at all. Isaiah studied her face, then said softly, "Is there something wrong with the pass?" She paused. Then she said it. "You don't look like you belong in this seat, sir." Coach's in the back. It landed like a slap. Quiet, precise, devastating. Isaiah didn't flinch. Not right away. He took a breath. One he'd taken 100 times in his life. He'd heard those words before. Not always out loud, but in tone, in glances, in tightened expressions and sudden suspicions. And suddenly, his mind wasn't in seat 2A. It was 15 years ago, standing outside a classroom in Atlanta, shivering in a worn hoodie. His teacher had told him to wait outside for not wearing the right shoes, not for acting out, not for being disruptive, just for not looking like he fit in. That memory passed through him like static. He returned to the moment, eyes steady. Passengers around him looked up. A few turned away. One man raised his eyebrows. One woman, young, Korean American, sitting in 2B, shifted in her seat, uncertain. Brittany turned to someone behind her. "Mark," she said, "can you escort this gentleman to the back until we confirm Mark Chambers, a younger flight attendant? Step forward, athletic, square jaw, bright smile that didn't reach his eyes." "Of course," he said quickly. He reached down toward Isaiah's briefcase. Isaiah held up a hand. "I'll carry my own bag." Mark straightened, lips tight. "Look, we're just doing our job. No need to make this into something." Isaiah stood, not fast, not angry, measured. "I'm not making this anything," he said. "But you already did." The woman in 2B finally spoke. Her voice was soft but firm. "He was here before any of us boarded. I saw it." Brittany didn't look at her. She motioned toward the curtain separating first class from the rest of the plane. Isaiah stepped through it. No apology, no regret, just distance. As he walked past the rows of business class and entered the crowded middle of the plane, the smell of reheated meals and the murmur of travel noise met him. Someone bumped his arm with a backpack. A baby cried 2 rows down. His seat was somewhere near the back now. He didn't care. He sat, slowly, gripping the armrest with one hand and the edge of his briefcase with the other. It wasn't about the seat. It was about being seen. In the row ahead of him, a small boy with curly hair dropped a toy. Isaiah picked it up and handed it over. The boy smiled. "Thanks, mister." Isaiah nodded, then looked down at the folded audit notes in his lap. The header read, "Luma Air North America, Internal Report, Ops Evaluation," and just beneath it, prepared by Isaiah Cole, Vice President, Global Operations. No one around him knew. Not yet, but in less than 15 minutes, they would. And when they did, no one on this flight, including Brittany Lang or Mark Chambers, would ever forget what came next. Isaiah sat still in seat 29C, his knees slightly cramped by the tray table in front of him. His leather briefcase rested at his feet, tilted to one side. A tiny scratch across the corner caught the reflection of the overhead light. He stared at it for a while, not really seeing it, but letting his thoughts settle into the hum of the cabin around him. He wasn't angry, not in the way people expected a man to be after public humiliation. He was something quieter, something heavier, disappointed, disgusted, but mostly tired. The kind of tired that came from spending a lifetime having to pretend moments like this were isolated, harmless, unintentional. A flight attendant walked down the aisle without looking at him. Her cart bumped the edge of his seat. She didn't apologize. He didn't flinch. Behind him, a toddler screamed. The mother juggled juice boxes and crayons. Isaiah leaned back, adjusting the armrest with one finger, the corners of his mouth flat. He was supposed to be in first class right now, reviewing policy revisions, preparing for a surprise inspection at Luma Air's Lisbon terminal. Instead, he was here, still polite, still quiet, still measuring everything. He opened his phone, not to check messages, but to bring up the note he had started a week ago. The title read, Passenger Equity Concerns. Internal Culture Notes Confidential. It had 4 bullet points so far. He added a 5th. Witnessed incident personally. Lead purser removed passenger without verifying. Bias evident. Recommend immediate response. He paused. He didn't add names. Not yet. Not because he was protecting anyone, but because he wanted to be right. Not reactionary. Not emotional. Just right. Up front. Somewhere beyond the curtain. They were serving pre-flight drinks to the same man now in seat 2A. Isaiah remembered his face. Carter Brig. Loud voice. Cheap cologne. Designer belt with the logo too big. He hadn't said anything cruel. He didn't have to. When Isaiah had been escorted from the seat, Carter had smiled. Smug. Triumphant. The smile of a man who enjoyed seeing someone removed. Who liked watching the line between who belonged and who didn't. Isaiah had seen that smile before. From classmates, from colleagues, from board members who couldn't pronounce his name until they needed his help fixing their logistics. He'd seen it too many times. And then there was the woman in 2B. The only person who'd said anything. He didn't even know her name, but her voice had cut through the silence like a flare in fog. It hadn't been loud, but it had been firm. She had seen him, and that meant something. His thoughts drifted again to 2002. His first real interview. He had walked into a downtown Atlanta office, resume perfectly printed, shoes polished with a cloth and dish soap the night before. The man who interviewed him had leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against his chin. "You're sharp," he had said, "but we're looking for someone with a bit more polish, a bit more image." Image. He never forgot that word, not once in the 20 years since. He leaned back in seat 29C now, closing his eyes briefly as a wave of turbulence passed. His hand stayed steady on the armrest. He wasn't going to cause a scene. He wasn't going to raise his voice. He didn't have to. Truth has weight. And eventually, it lands. A flight attendant passed by again. This time she made eye contact, just briefly, then kept walking. Isaiah opened his eyes fully and looked down the aisle. In business class, Dev Patel, a tech entrepreneur who had boarded early, adjusted his phone slightly. He had recorded a few moments from earlier quietly, discreetly capturing the exact second Isaiah had been removed from his rightful seat without protest. Dev didn't post it. He didn't want a spectacle. But he had sent a screenshot and a 2-line message to his corporate PR director back in San Francisco. Passenger in 2A removed. Think he's someone important. Something's off. Back in first class. Sophia Lee had not said another word, but she hadn't looked away either. She sat upright, arms crossed, eyes fixed forward. Her mind was turning too. She had watched Isaiah board, watched him settle in, watched how naturally he moved, how he didn't glance around like someone out of place. She had known, and she had also seen the look on Brittany's face. Not confusion, not protocol, just disbelief. The disbelief that someone like Isaiah could possibly belong in a seat like 2A. Sophia glanced over at Carter, who was now drinking a double scotch and scrolling on his tablet like nothing had happened. He let out a laugh about something on his screen. Sophia looked away. Behind her, Lena Ortiz, a senior flight attendant, quietly tapped on her in-flight tablet. She had seen the manifest herself before boarding. Isaiah Cole was listed as seat 2A, first class, VIP designation. She double-checked, still the same. She printed a new copy, walked to the service galley, found Brittany. I rechecked the manifest, Lena said quietly. Seat 2A was never reassigned. He belongs there. Brittany didn't flinch. It's already done. He's moved, but the seat was his. Lena insisted, her voice low, firm. Brittany's voice hardened. I'm not turning this into a thing. We're behind schedule. Lena stared at her, just for a moment, then walked away. She walked to the cockpit, knocked once. The door cracked open. Captain Thomas Reese looked up from his checklist. We have a problem, she said. You're going to want to see this before we leave the ground. Captain Reese had flown for 22 years. He'd seen weather delays, medical emergencies, equipment issues, but when he scanned the manifest and saw the red highlighted internal designation next to Isaiah's name, he didn't blink. How long has he been in economy? 10 minutes, Lena replied, and he said nothing at all. Captain Reese took a long breath. Then let's fix this. Back in economy, Isaiah was checking his watch, not impatiently, just with awareness. He had promised himself he would stay composed, but even composure has a limit when it's tested without cause. He was reaching for his water when he heard it. A voice, familiar, professional. This is your captain speaking. We're holding pushback for a moment as we resolve a seating clarification. We appreciate your patience. He smiled, barely, not out of satisfaction, but out of certainty. The gears had started to move. The system had been tested, and someone, somewhere up front, had finally decided to see. Isaiah stood just outside the curtain that divided first class from the rest of the plane. He wasn't in a rush to re-enter, not yet. He let his fingers rest on the back of a seat for support. The carpeted aisle felt too narrow all of a sudden, like it was designed to move people forward, but never meant to bring someone back. Passengers didn't say much as he passed them earlier. A few gave him that polite half-smile, the one people give when they witness something wrong but don't want to get involved. Some stared down at their phones. A few exchanged glances, but quickly turned away when he looked back. This wasn't the first time he'd been judged before anyone asked his name, and it probably wouldn't be the last. But he intended to make sure it was the last time it happened on his watch. Isaiah had spent most of his professional life making things run. He managed flight operations, optimized crew training, dealt with vendor negotiations, and reviewed safety compliance data until his eyes blurred. He'd never once had to prove his position with a name tag or a speech. He didn't need to. He let his actions speak. But that was the problem, wasn't it? He had spent years building a reputation that could speak for him, and yet all it took was one glance from someone like Brittany Lang to erase it. No record, no resume, no internal clearance code on a manifest could stop someone who had already decided he didn't belong. It reminded him of the summer he applied for Luma Air's executive mentorship track. He had just turned 25. He had 3 years of field experience and more letters of recommendation than anyone else in the program. He wore his best suit, not because he thought he needed to impress anyone, but because he had been raised to believe that how you show up says something about how you value yourself. He had waited in a small conference room for over an hour. The interview had gone well. At least, it had felt that way. Until the end. The man across from him, a regional manager with a silver tie and tired eyes, said, "You've got a great background. Isaiah, really strong. But if I'm being honest, we're looking for someone with a little more polish. The kind of person passengers expect to see leading an operation." That word again, Polish. He remembered walking out into the hallway and staring at his reflection in the glass. Tie straight, shoes clean, speech clear, voice steady. So what didn't he have now? Standing once again outside a room he had been removed from, he understood. It was never about polish. It was about perception. Inside the cockpit. Captain Thomas Reese had already reviewed the manifest 3 times. The name Isaiah Cole glowed in soft amber on the tablet screen. The designation beside it marked with a red internal VIP code reserved for only the highest level executives and inspectors. Captain Reese didn't consider himself political. He considered himself a pilot, a man of routine, a man of systems. And this wasn't a glitch. This was a failure in judgment. He called Lena back into the cockpit. "Has he said anything?" Reese asked. "Not a word," Lena said. "He sat down in economy like it didn't matter." The captain nodded slowly. Then he closed the manifest. "Then let's go tell him it does." Meanwhile, in seat 2A, Carter Brigg was halfway through his second whiskey. He had removed his shoes and placed one foot up on the wall in front of him, humming a little tune between sips. He wasn't worried. He'd seen situations like this before. People who didn't quite look like they belonged getting moved. It happened. Not his problem. Besides, the guy hadn't made a fuss. That meant it probably wasn't a big deal. He reached into his carry-on and pulled out a cheap paperback. Didn't even notice that Sophia Lee had been watching him the whole time. She hadn't spoken again, but she hadn't stopped watching. Her arms were still crossed, her mind racing. She had boarded early and seen Isaiah take his seat with the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from familiarity. Like he belonged in that seat because he earned it. She'd flown enough to know the difference. So had Lena. Back in the galley, Lena replayed the entire moment in her mind. Brittany's tone, Mark's posture, the way no one else on the crew had questioned it. That's what hurt most. The silence. She had known better. She had seen Isaiah's name on the manifest. She should have spoken sooner. But she hadn't wanted to cause friction before takeoff. She hadn't wanted to challenge her lead purser publicly. And now, that silence was ringing louder than any engine roar. Up in business class. Dev Patel was reading the news on his tablet when he received a reply to his message. "Thanks for flagging. Who was removed?" He typed a quick response. Passenger named Isaiah Cole. Black male, mid-40s, professional demeanor, quiet. Confirmed internal code. I think he's VP of Ops. There was a long pause. Then a new message popped up. Confirm with manifest. If it's true, this is a PR volcano. Don't post. Document everything. Dev didn't reply. He looked toward the curtain at the front of the cabin. Then he opened his phone's camera. Not to record, just to keep it ready. Back in economy, Isaiah finally stood up. The moment the curtain opened, he saw them. Captain Reese and Lena Ortiz, walking toward him. Passengers around him fell silent. Isaiah didn't blink. The captain extended a hand. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I believe we've made a serious mistake. Would you follow me?" Sir Isaiah stood without rushing. He adjusted his jacket, nodded once. He walked past the passengers again. But this time, they didn't look away. They looked at him, some curious, some confused, some ashamed, in first class. Carter Brigg looked up just as Isaiah stepped back into view. His smirk faltered. He sat up straighter, reached for his drink. Sophia Lee glanced at him, then turned back to Isaiah. Their eyes met briefly. Isaiah didn't smile, but he acknowledged her with a subtle nod. Then he looked at Brittany. She was standing at the galley, her posture rigid. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Isaiah looked past her, back to his seat. Seat 2A, still empty, still waiting. And as he stepped into the space he had already claimed once, he carried more than a briefcase. He carried a reckoning. Isaiah eased into seat 2A with the same steady poise he had shown when he was forced to leave it. But everything around him had shifted. The temperature of the cabin, the eyes that followed his every move, the tension that floated through the air like a held breath. He didn't say a word. He placed his briefcase beneath the seat again, adjusted the fold of his trousers, and rested both hands lightly on his lap. It wasn't about reclaiming a seat. It was about reclaiming dignity. Captain Reese stood nearby, arms behind his back, the printed manifest still in hand. He didn't speak either. His silence wasn't indifference. It was support. Brittany Lang remained at the front galley, her eyes darting between Isaiah and the captain, her jaw locked in place. She looked like she wanted to disappear, but it was too late for that. Isaiah turned his head slightly, just enough to see her. She opened her mouth. I'm truly sorry for the confusion earlier, she said. It was a system issue, a glitch. I didn't mean for it to come across the way it did. Isaiah's voice was calm. It didn't come across a way. It came directly. She blinked. Her throat tightened. He continued, still even, still measured. You saw my face. Then you looked at my ticket. Then you asked me to leave. That wasn't protocol. That was perception. Brittany tried again. Her voice cracked. We had to act quickly. You weren't responding clearly. Isaiah didn't raise his voice. I responded clearly. Twice. Mark Chambers appeared from the side, fidgeting with the sleeve of his blazer. He looked between the captain and Isaiah, and then muttered under his breath, This is getting blown way out of proportion. Captain Reese turned sharply. That's enough, he said. His voice cut through the cabin like a bell. Not loud, but final. He looked to Isaiah. I'd like to speak with you in the galley. Privately. Isaiah nodded once. He rose, gathered his briefcase again, and followed the captain down the short corridor to the front. The curtain whispered closed behind them. In the galley. The hum of refrigeration units filled the space. The overhead lights glowed soft and sterile. Captain Reese turned to face him fully, shoulders squared. Mr. Cole, he said, lowering his voice. I don't know what to say. This never should have happened. Isaiah studied the captain's face, not with anger, but with the quiet patience of someone who had learned to wait for truth to settle before speaking. I didn't come here looking for an apology, he said. I came to observe. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a plain white envelope. The airline's embossed logo was printed discreetly on the front. He handed it to the captain. That's my credential packet, an audit memo. It was supposed to be delivered to your office in Lisbon tomorrow. Reese opened it slowly, scanned the contents. His eyes widened. Isaiah Cole, a vice president of global operations. He closed the folder and exhaled through his nose. Isaiah continued. This flight was part of a larger review. We've had 3 unresolved complaints about discriminatory incidents in premium cabins over the last 2 months. My department logged each one. Each time, the crew report said there was a misunderstanding. Reese looked down. Isaiah's voice dropped lower, but never lost its precision. I didn't expect to become the 4th complaint. The captain shook his head. I'll support whatever action you choose to take, he said. Isaiah nodded. I'm not here for theatrics. I'm here for accountability. Outside the curtain. The rest of first class remained quiet. Sophia Lee sat upright in seat 2B, hands folded in her lap. She hadn't spoken since Isaiah returned, but her posture radiated calm resistance. She turned slightly to the aisle and locked eyes with Brittany. It wasn't a stare of anger, just clarity. The kind that says, I saw what you did, and I won't forget it. 2 rows behind. Carter Brigg had lost his earlier smirk. He was staring blankly at the screen in front of him, pretending to read an article he hadn't scrolled past in 5 minutes. His whiskey glass was still half full, but his appetite for performance had dried up. Dev Patel, up in business class, was still observing from the shadows. He wasn't filming. He hadn't posted a single image, but he had gathered names, times, and statements. He had spoken with Sophia briefly after boarding, and now he had enough to build a timeline. He opened a private chat with his PR director again. Confirmed. Passenger removed was VP level. Crew failed to verify boarding pass. Returning to seat now. I think internal action is coming. Back in the galley, Captain Reese glanced again at the document in his hand. This changes everything, he said softly. Isaiah replied without emotion. No, this confirms everything. Reese looked up. I mean what you said. I'll support whatever you decide. Isaiah looked toward the curtain, then back at the captain. I'd like to handle it myself, he said. But when the time comes, I'll need your voice, not just your silence. Reese nodded once. Absolutely. Isaiah returned to his seat. This time, when he walked down the aisle, the silence that greeted him wasn't dismissive. It was observant, watchful. A few passengers made eye contact. One man gave a slight nod. A woman placed her phone face down on the tray table. Isaiah sat in 2A again, slower now. Not because he was tired, but because he understood the gravity of the moment. Carter stood awkwardly, backed away, and mumbled something that sounded like an apology. Isaiah didn't respond. He just said quietly, You didn't care. That's worse than not knowing. Brittany and Mark stood near the galley divider, visibly tense. Mark's arms were crossed, but his fingers twitched. Brittany's lips were drawn in a thin line. Neither one spoke. Isaiah turned toward them. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. This was never about a boarding pass. He said, It was about a decision. One you made the moment you looked at me. Brittany tried again. I truly apologize if I made you feel Isaiah held up a hand. Don't apologize for how I felt. Apologize for what you did. That line settled into the cabin like dust in sunlight. Lena Ortiz stepped forward from behind them, the manifest still in hand. He's right, she said. Voice even. We can't fix what we won't admit. The captain reappeared behind them, arms folded, gaze firm. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His presence was enough. Isaiah turned back to his seat. He placed his briefcase gently by his feet, crossed one leg, and rested his hands together again. It wasn't over, but it had begun, and the difference was being felt. Not in shouts, but in silence. The hush in the cabin lingered like a fog that had no wind to clear it. For a long moment, no one moved. No one reached for a drink. No one adjusted a seat. The silence was not peace. It was reckoning. Isaiah sat in 2A with his posture composed and his gaze quiet, like a man who had carried too many invisible burdens to let this one bend him. He could feel the shift not in power, but in weight, the weight of having been seen, the weight of being watched now not for removal, but for response. Across the aisle. Sophia Lee's hands were still folded. Her nails dug slightly into the skin of her palm, but she kept her face calm. She had said what she needed to say earlier. She had watched him be taken from this very seat like an intruder. Now she was watching him take it back without raising a voice. And somehow, that made the moment heavier. A few rows behind them, Carter Brigg leaned forward in 3D, his elbows planted on his knees. The whiskey buzz was long gone. He looked uncomfortable now, but not regretful. He glanced around, scanning the other passengers as if to gauge their opinions before forming his own. Mark Chambers shifted beside the galley. He kept running his tongue along the inside of his cheek, a nervous tic he didn't even know he had. Brittany Lang remained upright, frozen. She hadn't moved since Isaiah reclaimed his seat. She had always prided herself on control. Her uniform was perfect. Her voice always calm, but something inside her had cracked. She felt it, even if she wouldn't name it yet. Then came the sound. Not loud, not aggressive. It was the crinkle of paper. Isaiah reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folded page. The same audit notes he had been reviewing before all of this began. He unfolded them with care, not as a gesture of drama, but as a quiet reminder. He was not here by accident. He was not here as an intruder. He was here because he belonged here. And the seat, the class, the title, none of it gave him that right. His life did. His work did. His dignity did. Across the aisle. Sophia leaned slightly in his direction. She didn't speak, but her movement was deliberate. A small act of presence, of alignment, behind her. Lena Ortiz walked forward from the galley with even steps. She stopped just beside Brittany and took a deep breath. He was on the manifest from the beginning, she said aloud. I checked it myself. Twice. Her voice was not angry. It was steady. Brittany didn't turn. Lena continued. We didn't listen. We assumed. And when we realized the mistake, we tried to move past it instead of fixing it. There it was. The first crack in the wall. Not a collapse. Not a confession. Just truth. Soft and undeniable. Brittany closed her eyes, not out of agreement, but because the truth, once spoken, cannot be ignored. Mark crossed his arms and exhaled loudly. Come on, Lena. We had to make a quick call. It's not like we... She interrupted him. We made the wrong one. That was enough. Passengers in rows 1 through 4 began exchanging glances. No one said anything yet, but now the silence was changing. No longer the silence of complicity. Now it was the silence of accountability waiting to land. In business class. Dev Patel watched everything unfold with careful attention. He wasn't interested in drama. He didn't want to be the guy who uploaded a video for likes. But he believed in documentation, in proof. In truth, that could not be twisted after the fact. He had a video. He had names. He had statements. But what mattered now was what came next. He opened his notebook and began jotting observations. Not for the internet. For the boardroom. Back in 2A. Isaiah let his eyes drift to the edge of the cabin wall. The ambient light from the window cast a soft reflection on the surface of his seat. He could see part of his face in it. Strong, quiet, unmoved. He wasn't angry. He was focused. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. The internal struggle still pulsed beneath the surface. He thought of his mother. She had worked for 3 decades as a postal worker in Baltimore. She had raised 3 children on a government paycheck and taught them all the same rule. Do not let them make you small just so they can feel tall. That rule had carried him through boardrooms and layovers and 1,000 little slights that no HR report would ever document. Now, it carried him through this. He turned slightly and looked at Brittany again. She still hadn't spoken. And he realized then, it was not guilt that made her quiet. It was fear. Fear of what she had revealed about herself. Fear of the version of her that the entire cabin had now seen. He didn't pity her, but he understood the moment. Because fear, like silence, is loud in a room full of watching eyes. Then, from behind, came a voice, soft but clear. Mr. Cole, Sophia said, just loud enough for him to hear. Thank you for coming back. He turned to her, and for the first time since he boarded, he smiled. Not wide, not performative, just real. Thank you for speaking up, he said. And that was it. A full circle, quiet and complete. That was when Captain Reese returned to the cabin, this time walking with intent. He stopped at the front of first class and faced the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice steady, "we will be departing shortly. I'd like to acknowledge what occurred before takeoff. A seating decision was made in error and has been corrected." He paused. "We take every report seriously, and sometimes the best thing a captain can do is listen. Today was one of those days." A few heads nodded. Isaiah didn't move. He didn't need to, because now the cabin knew. This wasn't just about one man and one seat. This was about something bigger, something every passenger could feel but hadn't had words for. Until now. And somewhere in the cabin, someone whispered to themselves, not quite sure why they were whispering. Finally, someone didn't just fly. He stood. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the sun dipped lower across the tarmac. Through the window beside seat 2A, the glow cast soft amber lines across Isaiah Cole's jacket. He sat still, composed, but his mind was turning faster than any engine outside. He had reclaimed his seat, but he hadn't reclaimed peace. Not yet. Captain Reese had returned to the cockpit. Sophia Lee had gone quiet again beside him, her presence steady but gentle. Passengers ahead were now pretending to read magazines, suddenly interested in safety cards, or simply keeping their eyes glued to the nothingness on their tray tables. But some weren't pretending. Some were watching closely. One of them was Lena Ortiz. She stood just a few feet back near the service station. Her heart was pounding, not from fear, but from something heavier. A question that had been forming ever since she watched Isaiah return to his seat without fanfare, without vengeance. Why hadn't she spoken sooner? She'd known the moment Brittany questioned Isaiah that something was off. She had seen him board early, had seen the manifest, had seen the internal VIP code that marked him as someone important. But still, she stayed quiet. Not because she agreed with what Brittany had done, but because silence had always felt safer. Until now. Now silence felt like complicity. Lena shifted her weight and looked toward the galley, where Brittany was now speaking in hushed tones with Mark Chambers. "He didn't even get angry," Mark whispered, as if that somehow proved something. Brittany's reply was low and sharp. "That's what makes it worse. It's not even about what happened. It's about how it looked." Mark scoffed. "It looked like a misunderstanding. That's all. I didn't do anything wrong." Lena stepped closer. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You didn't do anything right either." Mark turned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She didn't blink. "It means you watched him get pulled from his seat and said nothing. It means you touched his bag without permission. It means you laughed when someone mentioned race and didn't even pause to think." Brittany stood straighter. "Lena, let's not start dividing the crew. We made a judgment call. We're professionals. Sometimes mistakes happen." Lena folded her arms. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a decision. And when you realized it was the wrong one, you tried to bury it." The tension in the galley rose like heat in a sealed room. From her position at the curtain, Lena could see Isaiah's back, the angle of his shoulders, the calm tilt of his head. He wasn't demanding anything, and that was the hardest part. Because when someone refuses to scream, it forces you to hear everything they didn't say. Back in business class. Dev Patel's fingers hovered over the keyboard of his laptop. He had taken down every detail, names, actions, the tone of voices, the time. It all began. He wasn't writing for a news outlet. He was writing for impact. He opened a secure internal portal used by high-level contractors at Luma Air's global vendor board and drafted a formal incident escalation. It wasn't a complaint. It was a flag. Incident observed by independent witness. Senior exec removed from assigned seat. Possible discriminatory bias. Recommend leadership review. He paused, then added a line. Passenger remained composed. No escalation. Crew attempted to downplay incident. Others witnessed. He hit save, then looked up, back in first class. Sophia leaned slightly toward Isaiah. They still haven't said anything that sounds like the truth, she said quietly. Isaiah turned to her, his voice low. They won't. Not unless someone makes them. She tilted her head. Are you going to? He looked toward the galley, then out the window. I shouldn't have to. The engines began to hum softly beneath the floor. The mechanical thrum of taxi prep. A new attendant came down the aisle with a fresh tray of warm towels and a clipboard. Not part of the original crew. A standby who had been rotated in without much explanation. Lena saw him approach and whispered something to him. He nodded, discreetly avoiding Brittany and Mark as he began to assist passengers. That's when Olivia Chen entered the cabin. She was a regional in-flight director. Short black blazer, crisp white shirt, badge clipped neatly to her waist. She didn't smile. She didn't greet anyone with the usual pep of airline staff. She went straight to Lena. Captain asked me to step in. Heard there was an incident. Lena nodded once and handed her a printed manifest. Olivia scanned it. Her eyes found Isaiah's name within seconds. Her jaw tightened. Then she asked, Is he still seated? Lena nodded toward 2A. Olivia looked over, saw him. She paused. I've seen him in meetings. Never in a cabin. Lena lowered her voice. He was pulled out of first class, without cause. Olivia's grip on the paper tightened. She took a breath, then walked forward. When she reached Isaiah's row, she knelt slightly beside him, lowering her voice to a private pitch. Mr. Cole, I'm Olivia Chen, Director of Cabin Operations for the Northeast Region. I just received the flight report and manifest. Isaiah gave her a single nod. Thank you for coming. She hesitated. I'm sorry. He looked at her, eyes steady. I don't need an apology. She waited. I need to know someone saw what happened. Olivia straightened. I did. He looked down, then back at her. That matters. She returned to the galley. Brittany saw her. Tried to speak. Olivia didn't stop. She simply said, We'll be speaking after landing. I suggest you begin reviewing your incident log. Thoroughly. Brittany's mouth opened, then closed. Mark backed further into the corner. Isaiah looked back down at his audit notes. They were still open in his lap, but he no longer needed them. The real audit was already in progress, in every glance, every breath, every silence that finally broke. For years, he had operated behind reports and policy documents, anonymous surveys, quiet HR flags, and none of it ever stuck. But this was different. This wasn't paperwork. This was memory. The kind people carry. The kind that changes things. The captain's voice returned over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for departure. Flight time to Lisbon is just under 7 hours. Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff. The engines began to growl louder, but the silence that had filled first class was finally giving way to something else. Awareness. And Isaiah knew, as the plane began to roll down the tarmac, that this flight had already reached altitude long before it ever left the ground. The wheels of Flight 4111 lifted off the runway with a quiet grace, the soft hum of ascent filling the cabin. Outside, New York slipped beneath a thin veil of clouds. Inside, however, the atmosphere had never felt clearer. Isaiah Cole sat in 2A, his seatbelt fastened, hands folded neatly in his lap. The plane had left the ground, but his mind had not. It was still rooted in everything that had happened in the 30 minutes before takeoff. The glances, the judgment, the silence, the apology that never came, and the consequences that had yet to land. He turned his head slightly and looked out the window, not at the sky, but at the faint reflection of his own face in the glass. He barely recognized the man staring back. Not because he looked different, but because he felt something stir in him he hadn't felt in a long time. Resolve. He'd spent years fighting for equity through the language of policy and the calm of professionalism, but now he understood something he had pushed aside for too long. Sometimes policy wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to draw the line yourself. Captain Thomas Reese sat in the cockpit, running through altitude logs and confirming their cruising level with air traffic control, but his mind wasn't on flight vectors. It was on Isaiah. He kept seeing the way the man had carried himself, the silence, the dignity, the restraint, and that voice in the back of his head kept whispering the same thing over and over. This never should have happened. Captain Reese prided himself on neutrality. He believed in chain of command. He believed in protocol. But what had unfolded in his cabin hadn't been about protocol. It had been about perception. And he knew it. Every pilot knew when something felt off. And this had felt wrong from the very first moment Lena brought him the manifest. He tapped the call button on his console. A moment later, Lena's voice came through his headset. "Yes, Captain, send Olivia to the cockpit. Please." She paused. "Right away." A few minutes later, Olivia Chen entered the small cockpit galley with her usual composed expression, though her eyes held something heavier now. The captain looked up from his notes. "Close the door." She did. "Talk to me," he said simply. Olivia didn't hesitate. I reviewed the manifest twice. There was no reassignment, no seat change. His designation was active and valid, and what I observed was not a misunderstanding. Captain Reese leaned back slightly in his chair, absorbing her words. "Do you believe this was racially motivated?" She didn't blink. Yes. His shoulders tightened, not out of shock, but out of the weight of truth that no longer had room to hide. "And Lena?" he asked. "She confirmed everything. She tried to stop it before we left the gate. Brittany overrode her." He nodded slowly, and Mark passive, participant, but complicit. He put hands on the passenger's bag without permission, smirked when Lena mentioned bias. Captain Reese looked out the small cockpit window, the curve of the horizon now coming into view. "I've flown 20 years, he said. "I've had engines catch fire, weather delays that lasted 12 hours. I've seen medical emergencies mid-air, but I've never seen someone humiliated so quickly, so quietly." He turned back to Olivia. "We're handling this before we land." Olivia straightened. "I'm with you." The captain pressed another button. This time, the call went to the cabin intercom. "Lena, have Mark and Brittany report to the forward galley." He stood from his seat. It was time. In the main cabin. Isaiah was sipping water when he saw Lena approaching. She didn't speak. She just gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. He understood. They were ready. At the front galley, Brittany and Mark stood waiting. Mark had his arms crossed again, though the twitch in his fingers had returned. Brittany looked down at the service panel as if studying the buttons might erase what was coming. Captain Reese stepped in a moment later, Olivia behind him. He spoke without raising his voice. "Thank you both for coming." They straightened. "We've reviewed the manifest and the incident," he continued, "and I've spoken with regional operations." Brittany opened her mouth, but he held up a hand. "I'm not here for explanations. I'm here for decisions." Mark shifted his weight. The captain looked at both of them. You removed a verified passenger from his assigned seat without confirming details. You disregarded another attendant's correction. You escalated a situation you should have de-escalated. And then you stood by while that man was humiliated in front of an entire cabin. Mark muttered, "But we didn't know who he was." Captain Reese narrowed his eyes. "You didn't need to. You just needed to respect him." Silence. Then Olivia spoke. "And you didn't." Brittany's mouth opened again. Her voice was shaky now. "Captain, we were acting on instinct." The gate agent said. "The gate agent didn't say anything." Olivia cut in. "I checked." Captain Reese's voice hardened. "This is not the kind of crew I fly with. Not on my aircraft. Not under my command." He turned to Olivia. "Prepare the replacement crew file. When we reach Lisbon, both are relieved of duty pending permanent action. You have my signed authorization." Mark's eyes went wide. "You're serious?" Isaiah's voice entered from behind them. "He's not the only one." They turned. Isaiah had stepped forward, quietly, without anyone noticing. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply held out a folded card from his wallet. Luma Air Executive Termination Authorization signed and sealed. Effective immediately, Brittany Lang and Mark Chambers were no longer part of Luma Air. Isaiah handed it to Olivia. There was no vengeance in his face, no smugness, only clarity. "You judged me for how I looked, not for who I am," he said. "You assumed no one would notice, that no one would care." He looked between them. "But I built this company to care, even when no one's watching." Brittany's eyes filled with tears. She turned away, one hand to her mouth. Mark said nothing, just stared blankly at the floor. Isaiah turned to Captain Reese. "Thank you." "For seeing." The captain nodded, deeply. Isaiah returned to his seat. He didn't look back, not because he was done, but because he was finally beginning. The cabin lights remained dimmed, but the energy inside first class had completely shifted. Word travels fast in small spaces, and even faster when silence carries more weight than words. No announcement had been made, no broadcast over the intercom, but the passengers around Isaiah Cole could feel something had changed. Brittany Lang and Mark Chambers were gone, relieved of duty midair, removed not just by title, but by truth. Isaiah sat in 2A, once again calm, once again silent, but no longer alone in the way he had been an hour ago. The cabin wasn't hostile anymore. It was reflective, watchful. Some still wrestled with their own discomfort. Others sat quietly, thinking, listening. Sophia Lee sat next to him, her hands resting on her knees. She didn't speak, but her presence felt heavier than any apology, a kind of solidarity that didn't need to be loud. The curtain to first class opened briefly, and Olivia Chen stepped through. She didn't carry papers or files, just herself. She looked at Isaiah and offered a subtle nod. "May I?" she asked softly. Isaiah gestured to the aisle. She stepped beside him and faced the passengers in rows 1 through 4. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "For those of you who witnessed the earlier disruption," she began, "I want to clarify something." Heads turned, arms unfolded, eyes lifted. The passenger seated in 2A is Mr. Isaiah Cole. He is the Vice President of Global Operations for Luma Air. His seat was correctly assigned. His documentation was verified. The error was not in the system. It was in judgment. There was a visible ripple in the cabin. A few passengers exhaled. A couple looked away. Isaiah didn't flinch. Olivia continued, "We understand that what happened before takeoff was witnessed by many of you. We also know that moments like these, when left unspoken, become patterns. Today, that pattern stops. Someone behind Isaiah murmured. Damn right. She didn't pause. Mr. Cole didn't raise his voice. He didn't create a disturbance. He simply took his seat and was asked to leave it, not because of protocol, but because of assumptions. She turned and looked at Isaiah. He deserves better, and so do all of you. Isaiah stood. He hadn't planned to. He wasn't trying to create a moment, but his body moved before he could second-guess it. He turned slightly to address the cabin. No speech prepared, no papers in hand, just truth. I didn't come here today to be noticed, he said. I boarded this flight quietly. No title badge, no announcement. I wanted to observe how we serve people. All people. He let that breathe, and what I saw was a reminder that dignity is still selective, that respect sometimes needs to be proven before it's given, and that even when we wear suits and speak softly and follow all the rules, some people still decide we don't belong. No one moved, not even the flight crew. Isaiah glanced at seat 2B. I was asked to leave the seat without explanation. I was told I didn't look like I belonged here. And when I asked why, I was told to wait in the back. A beat of silence. Then he added, Let me be clear. This wasn't about a boarding pass. It was about a moment. A moment when someone made a decision based on a picture they carried in their head about who deserves what. He looked around. But here's the thing. I didn't come back to the seat to reclaim it for myself. I came back to reclaim it for everyone who's ever been told to sit in the back quietly. For the ones who are judged before they speak, who are silenced before they're heard. His voice didn't rise. It dropped. That made it hit harder. I don't expect anyone here to fix the world, he said. But we're all responsible for the corners we touch. This cabin, this crew, this company. This is my corner. He sat down. The cabin remained still. No applause, no cheering, just breath, just reflection. That meant it landed. Sophia turned to him and whispered, Thank you for speaking, for not letting it slide. Isaiah looked at her and replied quietly, Thank you for not staying silent. From business class. Dev Patel watched the moment with a stillness of his own. He had paused his notes, his documentation, his messages. He wasn't writing now. He was just listening. For a long time, he had seen how people in positions of power responded to discomfort, usually with silence or delay. But this was different. He typed one final line. This flight didn't just take off. It woke up in seat 4C. An older woman with silver hair reached for a pen. She pulled the paper napkin from her drink tray and began writing. A note to herself. Something she never wanted to forget. In row 3D, Carter Briggs sat slouched, shoulders tense, face pale. He hadn't spoken since the captain's statement. He had seen Isaiah stand, watched him speak with more grace than he could have managed in 10 lifetimes, and felt something heavy settle into his chest. Shame, not because he was confronted, but because he hadn't been. He had taken that seat like it was his by default, had mocked the man who sat there before him, and now the whole cabin had seen what that seat really meant and who really belonged there. He shifted in his seat, but the weight remained. At the galley divider, Lena Ortiz stood quietly, hands clasped in front of her. She had listened to Isaiah's words like they were meant for her directly, and maybe they were. She had stayed quiet once, but she wouldn't again. She took a breath and stepped forward. Mr. Cole, she said gently, if it's all right, I'd like to speak. He looked up and nodded. Lena faced the passengers, her voice soft but steady. I've worked this route for 6 years. I've seen all kinds of people, all kinds of situations. But today was different, Because today I watched something happen that should have never happened, and I didn't stop it. She swallowed. That silence was mine, and I won't carry it forward. Isaiah nodded. That was all. The plane moved steady above the Atlantic now, its engines humming beneath them like a second heartbeat. But in the cabin, something deeper had started to move, a shift, a reckoning, not just about one seat, but about every time someone was asked to move for no reason at all. Somewhere over the Atlantic, night had finally caught up to Flight 411. The cabin lights had been dimmed further, creating that peculiar twilight of air travel when everything is still, yet nothing truly rests. The sky outside was a deep navy curtain, dotted faintly with distant stars. But the real shift wasn't in the heavens. It was inside the plane. Isaiah Cole sat in his seat, now with the tray table lowered, his hands resting lightly on an untouched meal. The food was hot, carefully plated, but he hadn't taken a single bite. It wasn't hunger that stirred in him, it was memory. He thought of the first time he ever sat in first class. He was 29. It was a work flight from Atlanta to Los Angeles. His ticket had been upgraded at the last minute by an assistant who thought he deserved it after pulling 3 all-nighters for a systems integration overhaul. Isaiah had walked into that cabin hesitantly, scanning the rows for someone who might challenge him. But no one did. Not then. That trip had felt like a symbol of change, a glimpse into the world he had been working toward. But now, years later, with a title few dared question and authority that reached the highest levels of aviation infrastructure, he realized something devastating, even from the top. You could still be pushed down, not by rank, but by perception. Across the aisle, Sophia Lee sat with her eyes closed. She wasn't asleep. She was replaying Isaiah's speech in her head. Every word, every pause. There was a weight to it that refused to leave her chest. She had seen incidents before, murmured things, comments passed too quickly to call out. But this one was different, because it happened out loud, in front of everyone. And for once, no one was allowed to pretend it didn't. She opened her eyes and looked at Isaiah's tray. You didn't eat? He offered a faint smile. Didn't feel right. Still doesn't, she whispered. 2 rows behind them. Carter Brigg couldn't sleep either. He had leaned back in his seat, headphones on, a movie playing with the sound off. He wasn't watching it. His gaze was fixed somewhere beyond the screen. His mind was stuck on Isaiah's face, not when he stood to speak, but when he'd been removed from his seat. The restraint in that moment haunted him. If it had been him, he would have shouted, demanded answers, maybe even thrown a punch. But Isaiah had done none of that. He just stood. And that was the part that gnawed at Carter, because somewhere deep inside, he knew why Isaiah had done it, because if he had fought back, no one would have asked what happened. They would have only seen a reaction, a disruption, a justification for removal. And so he had swallowed it, carried it, and Carter had laughed. That shame didn't wash off. He sat forward, slowly, as if the weight on his back had become too much to lean against. Back in the galley? Olivia Chen typed a detailed report into her encrypted tablet. Each line was a piece of the story and account that would reach executive desk before the plane even touched down. Her tone was factual, precise, but her chest ached with each word. She had joined this airline because she believed in what it could be, not just a company, but a symbol of possibility, of global connection. And now, staring at this report, she realized how far they still had to go. Lena Ortiz entered quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. I brought you one, she said. Olivia accepted it with a quiet, thank you. Lena sat beside her on the jump seat, curling her hands around the mug. I'm worried about what happens next, she admitted. Olivia glanced at her. For you, for all of us, Lena said. I've worked with Brittany for years. I've seen her smile at passengers, help crying children, calm nervous flyers. And yet today, her voice trailed off. Olivia finished the sentence. Today she showed us something else. Lena nodded. I keep asking myself when it started. When did bias become routine? When did assumptions start looking like protocol? Neither woman spoke for a long moment. Then Olivia replied, when people in power stop getting challenged, they stop checking themselves. That's how it starts. Lena looked up. But what about the ones who stay silent? Like me, Olivia turned to her. They matter just as much. Because silence isn't neutral. It's a choice. And today, you made a different one. Lena stared down at her mug, the steam curling upward like threads of thought too delicate to hold. I'm done staying quiet. Good, Olivia said softly. Because this is just the beginning. In business class. Dev Patel had started drafting an internal proposal. Not just a report, not just a summary of the incident, but a call for structural change, new training, new accountability systems, passenger rights language made visible, emergency override procedures when crew judgments contradicted digital records. He wasn't doing it for Isaiah. He was doing it for the next person who wouldn't be Isaiah, the one who didn't have the badge, the one who couldn't hand over an executive authorization card, the one who would be silenced, escorted out, and forgotten before anyone even asked their name. Up in the cockpit, Captain Thomas Reese sat watching the stars stretch endlessly ahead. The plane was cruising steady, but his mind was pacing. He had issued the decision, filed the report, but he knew something bigger had happened today. He had always thought of himself as fair, steady, unbiased, but today had made him wonder, how many other moments had passed like this before? How many times had he accepted the word of crew over the dignity of a stranger? And how many passengers had walked off his flights carrying invisible wounds? He reached for the radio, then stopped. No announcement could fix this. What came next wouldn't be spoken over intercoms. It would have to be lived, in first class. Isaiah finally leaned back. His tray table still held the untouched meal. He wasn't thinking about the food anymore. He was thinking about his father, a bus driver in Newark for 31 years. He used to say, son, the most important seat isn't the one you take. It's the one you offer when no one else will. Isaiah understood now. This seat in 2A was never about him. It was about everyone watching. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not give it up, not quietly, not ever again. Hours had passed since the incident, but time on a plane moves differently when the air feels thick with unspoken truths. The sky outside had gone full black, and the hum of the engines provided a steady rhythm to thoughts too deep for conversation. Isaiah Cole sat with his seat reclined, a blanket folded across his lap, eyes open but unfocused. He wasn't watching a movie or reading. He was listening to his breath, to the faint murmur of conversations a few rows back, to the silence from where Brittany and Mark used to stand. That silence said more now than they ever had. He had imagined moments like this before, scenarios where he might have to defend his place, his worth, his right to exist in spaces built to exclude people like him. But he had always believed, perhaps naively, that when he got high enough, far enough, respected enough, it would stop. It hadn't. It just changed shape. Sophia Lee had moved to stretch her legs but paused when she passed Isaiah's seat. You need anything, she asked softly. He looked at her and shook his head with a kind smile. Not right now. She lingered. You've made a lot of people think today. Isaiah's lips curved just slightly. That wasn't the plan. Sometimes the best messages aren't planned, she said. They just get lived out loud. She moved on, and Isaiah let his eyes close for a moment, resting not because he was tired, but because he needed to gather himself. In the galley, Olivia Chen stood over a satellite phone, speaking quietly to someone at corporate. "I understand," she said, her voice measured, "but this can't wait until we land. Senior legal and PR should be looped in now." A pause. "No, I'm not exaggerating. We have a verified executive forcibly removed from his seat, contradictory reports from crew, and public witnesses. We are in front of a storm, not behind it. Get ahead of it." She ended the call, her fingers lingering on the handset before setting it back down. Lena stood nearby, arms crossed, watching Olivia with something close to admiration. "You always this direct?" Olivia smiled faintly. "Only when the truth's already landed." Lena shifted her stance. "Do you think they'll actually follow through, I mean? Past the disciplinary files? Real change?" Olivia turned to her. "That depends. On what? On whether they see this as a liability or a mirror." Lena looked at her hands. "Feels like both." From the business class section, Dev Patel was now finalizing his report. He had taken the story beyond observation. Now it was becoming structure ideas for real reform. On his screen were slides titled Crisis Response Protocol, Passenger Equity Audit, and Empathy Training Framework. He'd built a career out of systems, out of metrics and digital infrastructure. But this was the first time he felt like those tools could mean something beyond optimization. They could mean decency in row 3D. Carter Brigg tapped on his phone. He wasn't checking messages or sports scores. He was typing slowly, backspacing often, writing a note to himself. A personal memo he had no intention of sending, but knew he needed to finish. "I watched a man get humiliated. Then I watched him carry it like it weighed nothing. And I laughed. And I took his seat. And now I know why I feel sick about it." He paused, staring at the blinking cursor. He kept typing. "I've coasted through life thinking my presence was earned when really it was expected, and I've never once had to prove I belonged in a seat. Until today. I never thought about what that costs others." He looked up and exhaled slowly. His drink sat untouched beside him, in the cockpit. Captain Thomas Reese looked out at the endless night sky, lit faintly by instrument panels and stars. The control column was steady under his hand, but his mind kept circling back to one phrase Olivia had used earlier. "We're in front of a storm." She hadn't meant weather. She meant legacy. What would happen when this story hit the ground? When Isaiah's name left the manifest and entered the news cycle? When the board of directors met next month and someone asked, "How did this happen?" He knew what the reports would say, but he also knew what he would say. "I saw it, and I acted, and that would have to be enough for now." Back in 2A, Isaiah finally opened the window shade again. The stars seemed closer at this altitude, brighter, like reminders that the sky, however cold, still carried light. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a worn leather notebook. Inside were pages of things he never said aloud, quotes, reflections, and questions that had stayed with him over the years. He flipped to the latest entry, dated the night before. "What does it mean to belong where you're not welcomed?" He stared at the words. Tonight had offered him the answer. It meant you stay anyway. Not out of pride, but out of purpose. Because if someone sees you hold your seat with grace when the world tries to snatch it away, maybe they'll find the courage to hold their own too. Isaiah wrote beneath it, "I stayed, and they saw, and now they will have to choose what they do with what they saw." He closed the book gently, Olivia returned to the front of the cabin and knelt beside his seat. I just got off the phone with legal and corporate. They're moving fast. Crisis teams, comms prep, full flight investigation. The board is already awake. Isaiah nodded. Good. We're drafting an official statement. Is there anything you want included? He looked at her carefully. Yes. He waited, then said it clearly. No one should need a title to be treated like a person. Olivia's throat tightened. I'll make sure that's heard. She stood, but lingered. You changed the way this crew sees itself. Isaiah looked toward the closed curtain where Brittany and Mark once stood. Sometimes things have to break before they can be rebuilt right. Behind them, the plane continued toward Lisbon, but the real destination had already been reached. A shift in perspective, a change in temperature, a quiet revolution at 35,000 feet. The cabin lights shifted gently to a soft blue, signaling the early stages of descent. The sky outside had begun to lighten, an early European dawn creeping into the clouds with pale amber streaks. Lisbon was still more than an hour away, but the tone inside the aircraft had changed once again. Gone was the heaviness that lingered after confrontation. In its place, something quieter had settled. Clarity. Isaiah Cole sat with his hands folded, fingers lightly tapping against one another as he listened to the low hum of announcements overhead. He could feel the plane beginning its gradual dip through the atmosphere, the subtle pressure shift in his ears. But for the first time since boarding, the turbulence wasn't inside him. He had spoken his truth. He had taken the weight that so many had learned to carry in silence and laid it bare in the open. Now it belonged to all of them. Sophia leaned over slightly, her voice still gentle from the long flight. You sleep at all? Isaiah shook his head. Didn't want to. Too much on your mind. He gave a slight smile. Actually, for once, not enough. She raised an eyebrow. That a good thing or a bad thing? He looked out the window. Maybe it's just peace. Sophia didn't press further. She understood the kind of peace he meant, the one that comes after standing your ground in a storm and realizing you're still upright. In the galley, Olivia Chen reviewed the overnight messages sent from corporate. Executives had issued a directive for immediate suspension of the crew members involved. The statement would be public by the time the wheels hit the tarmac. Internal policy revisions were already on the agenda for the next board meeting. A task force on in-flight bias and equity had been greenlit. She exhaled slowly, staring at the words on the screen. But Olivia knew something Isaiah had already learned. Policy was only the first step. It was behavior that had to change, culture, perspective, and that couldn't be drafted overnight. She closed the tablet. Lena stood nearby, having just completed a beverage sweep of the forward cabin. Her posture was straighter now, not out of tension, but resolve. You think they'll actually fix it? She asked softly. Olivia looked at her, not with certainty, but with honesty. Only if people like you and me keep making them. Lena nodded once, then turned toward the cabin. In business class. Dev Patel had begun exporting his final report into the company's secure Dropbox. Before clicking Submit, he added a final slide with one sentence, centered and bold. Culture is not measured by customer satisfaction. It's revealed by who we protect when no one is watching. He hit send. A few rows behind him, Carter Briggs scrolled through his phone, now reading more than writing. Articles about racial profiling in air travel, testimonies from passengers removed for reasons never explained, data he had never once cared to read. And suddenly, it all looked different, because now he wasn't reading about strangers. He was reading about the man whose seat he had taken, and the man who had let him return to it without revenge. Carter locked his screen and stared ahead. He didn't have the words yet, but he knew his silence from this point forward could no longer be innocent. In the cockpit, Captain Thomas Reese had begun the descent checklist. His hands moved with practiced ease, his voice steady as he checked in with air traffic control, but behind the professionalism, there was something personal now. Responsibility. He had once believed his job was simply to keep passengers safe, but now he understood something broader. People didn't just need safety from mechanical failure. They needed safety from each other, from harm wrapped in politeness, from judgment masquerading as protocol. He would never look at his manifest the same way again. He would never hear the words, "seat dispute," the same way again. He would never fly blind to these moments again. Back in first class, Isaiah retrieved his phone and opened a new message thread. Not to corporate, not to legal, to his mother. He typed slowly, then stopped. How do you explain to the woman who taught you to stand tall that standing tall had finally changed something? He kept the message simple. Landing soon. Long flight. Heavy in parts. But something cracked open tonight. Something real. I think you'd be proud. He hesitated, then added, I didn't fight back. I just refused to vanish. He hit send and slid the phone away. Sophia glanced sideways. You write to someone. My mother, Isaiah replied. She know what happened. He thought for a moment. She will, but I think she'll care more about how I handled it than what happened. Sophia nodded. I don't know you well, but I think she's probably right. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm and composed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've begun our descent into Lisbon Portela Airport. Local time is 6:14 a.m. Cabin crew, please prepare the cabin for arrival. The flight attendants, what was left of the working team, moved efficiently through the cabin. Lena paused as she passed Isaiah, adjusting the belt near his feet. He looked at her. She met his eyes. I meant what I said earlier, she whispered. Isaiah smiled softly. I know you did. She stood straighter. I'll remember this flight for the rest of my life. He held her gaze a moment longer. Good. So will I. The plane banked gently to the left. The sky outside had shifted again, now glowing with streaks of gold and lavender. Cities began to twinkle below. A coastline, docks, fields. But the most important transformation wasn't in the land below. It was in the people on board. When the plane touched down, there was no applause, just a quiet exhale that felt like a chapter closing. Wheels on ground, truth in air, change in motion. The wheels touched down with a whisper, soft yet definitive, like the final period at the end of a sentence no one wanted to forget. Lisbon lay just beyond the horizon, its tiled rooftops and cobbled streets still yawning into the soft morning light. The plane slowed gently, the engines humming lower as the flight began to taxi toward its gate. Inside the cabin, no one spoke. No one reached for their phones, or bags, or even seatbelts. There was something sacred in that moment, a collective stillness. The knowledge that this wasn't just the end of a flight. It was the end of something that needed to end, and the beginning of something none of them could quite define. Isaiah Cole remained in his seat, eyes fixed on the window. The runway passed like memories quickly, but deeply. He saw the past few hours flash behind his eyes being removed, standing silently, reclaiming his seat, choosing compassion when anger had begged for the microphone. He hadn't come here to be a symbol, but that's what justice sometimes required. The voice of Captain Thomas Reese returned, calm and steady. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Lisbon. Please remain seated as we complete final taxi. We ask for your patience as a few operational matters require attention before we deplane. There it was. The understatement of the year. Operational matters. As the plane eased into position, Isaiah caught sight of 3 ground vehicles stationed just outside the jet bridge. One of them bore the Luma Air insignia, but the other 2 were unfamiliar neutral white vans, likely contracted for crew replacement and security documentation. He breathed in through his nose and let it go slowly. He felt no vengeance, just responsibility. Lena Ortiz walked the aisle slowly, checking belts with the precision of someone who now viewed her job with brand new eyes. When she reached Isaiah's seat, she paused, just briefly. "I know it's not my place, but—" "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Isaiah turned his head to her. "You made space. That matters more than you know." He meant it. It was Lena's quiet choice to speak up that had cracked the first fissure in the wall. Rose behind him. Carter Briggs sat upright, seatbelt still fastened, even though most others had started shifting. He looked ahead, not just physically, but philosophically. He felt the burn of recognition on his skin, of the version of himself that existed before this flight and the one that might exist after. He hoped they'd never meet again. The jet bridge finally aligned. There was no celebratory chime, no announcement of first-class priority. Instead, Olivia Chen entered from the galley, clipboard in hand, flanked by 2 new crew members ready to take over the return flight. She turned to the cabin and spoke clearly, her voice even and firm. "We will begin deplaning shortly. Due to procedural reviews, we ask that everyone remain seated until directed. Certain passengers and crew will be disembarking under operational protocols." A few people shifted in their seats. No one complained. Isaiah stood. Every eye turned to him, not with suspicion now, but respect. He took a deep breath and reached for his bag. Sophia stood too. "Want company getting off?" Isaiah smiled. "No. I think this part I walk alone. Not because he had to, because he needed to." As he stepped forward into the aisle, Lena moved aside. Olivia waited near the galley with the replacement crew, clipboard lowered. No longer the executive, just someone witnessing something far more important than job titles. When Isaiah passed her, she met his gaze. "We'll be following your lead," she said. He nodded once, then exited the aircraft. Outside, the air was crisp, alive with the scent of tarmac and promise. A representative from airport operations extended a quiet greeting, gesturing toward a waiting sedan, not a flashy corporate car, but something quiet and respectful. Isaiah paused before entering it. He turned back toward the aircraft, the large metal bird that had become more than a vessel. It had become a mirror. Then he stepped in, back on board. The atmosphere was different now. Word had traveled beyond the cabin, into the hands of journalists, aviation regulators, and public opinion. But for those on the plane, it wasn't about headlines. It was about what they'd carry off with them. Sophia watched Isaiah's seat, now empty, and whispered to herself, "Hold your ground, even when it shakes." Carter finally undid his seatbelt. He wouldn't say much about this flight when he got home, but he would remember it every time he saw someone treated like an inconvenience. And he would no longer be the man who looked away. Olivia stood in the open doorway of the plane, clipboard at her side, the sun casting its early light across the tarmac. Behind her, the new crew began greeting passengers. The ones who stayed would carry the lessons of this flight forward, not as a scandal, but as a standard. As the plane began to empty, a cleaning team waited nearby, unaware of the story that had unfolded at 35,000 feet. But stories have a way of traveling, especially the ones built on quiet resistance, especially the ones that don't shout, but echo. Isaiah's plane had landed, but his message, it had just taken off. Isaiah's story is more than just a moment on a plane. It is a mirror reflecting the silent battles countless people face. everyday battles against assumptions, bias, and the cruelty of being judged before they are known. His quiet strength reminds us all that dignity isn't something given lightly. It is earned, carried, and fiercely protected. As we close this chapter, let us hold tightly to the message Isaiah left in his wake that respect should never be conditional, and no one should ever have to fight to simply belong. The courage to stand up, even without raising your voice, can ignite change far beyond one flight, one seat, or one moment. Thank you for joining us on this journey of resilience and justice. If Isaiah's story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring these important stories to light and inspires more voices to speak their truth. Stay tuned for more powerful stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us all of the dignity every human deserves.